Hello and welcome to the RPG Blender, where we give lesser played games and forgotten settings the roll the dice they deserve. I'm your host, Game Master George, and as you already know, today I'll be giving you a list of 5 games to try if you're a fan of the Dungeons & Dragons setting of Ravenloft. As always, I want to make this clear. I don't hate Dungeons & Dragons. I enjoy it when I get to play. But it makes me sad to see so many games left on the side in favor of another D&D campaign. So in this series, I'll be looking at some of the more popular Dungeons & Dragons settings and giving you some suggestions on games with a similar feel. Games that, if you enjoyed that setting, you might like to try. Now this is not a ranked list. You don't need to stick around to the end to hear the one true answer. Each game talked about will have strong elements which could lead to it being your number one. So I'll be starting with more commonly known games, becoming gradually less familiar as we go through the list. So if you hear one that you find interesting, or if there's one I missed, drop a comment and help future viewers find their own next game. Anyway, let's get started. I won't spend too much time talking about Ravenloft itself here. I assume if you're watching this video, you're already well familiar with this setting, but I will touch on a few key points which will help connect to the choice of games. Ravenloft is a gothic horror setting, playing up aspects of fear and survival, the grim struggle against an overwhelming force being a common theme. This place is a pocket dimension, controlled by the dark powers who have imprisoned the Dark Lords, such as the all-too-well-known Strahd. These Dark Lords rule over certain sections of the demiplane of dread, inflicting misery upon the inhabitants. However, these Dark Lords are themselves tormented by the dark powers, finding themselves repeatedly failing to gain the thing they seek, or kept on the edge of a deep fear realized. The players, meanwhile, will often find themselves tempted to dark activities in their struggle against these lords. Vulnerability, fear, tragedy, and corruption, these are the typical themes you will find in a game set here. So what games embody similar ideals? Number 1. One of the obvious answers to this is to look for a Cthulhu game. These contain many of the same themes of corruption, the unknown, and struggling against a vastly more powerful force. Specifically, look at the Cthulhu by Gaslight setting for Call of Cthulhu. This brings the game into the Victorian era, much more closely matching the feel of a Ravenloft game. Now, I hear some people saying, wait a minute, I want vampires, werewolves, and classic horror tropes, not space squids. And to you I say, so use vampires, werewolves, and classic horror tropes. While the most commonly considered foe for this game is the Outer Gods, generic supernatural or even mundane threats are perfectly valid. Take, for example, the adventure The Secret of Castro Negro. The connection to the Outer Gods is very light, and the entire adventure could be reflavored into a vampiric threat with minimal changes. The game itself is crunchy and extremely lethal. A PC body count isn't an unexpected event. This leads to an emphasis on investigation over combat, but the option for combat always remains. Vulnerability is also deeply rooted into this system even beyond the lethality of combat, both in forms of dealing with horrific encounters and sacrificing yourself or others to gain unnatural powers. That said, if you're looking for something easy to pick up and run, this may not be the right system. It is crunchy and will take some time to get used to, but the payoff is well worth it. Number 2. Now what if you like the idea of investigation gameplay, but do want a bit more action to your game? To this, I offer Rippers. Rippers takes a similar idea to Ravenloft with the secret dark forces at work in the world. The players are hunters out to stop these evil fiends. Set in the same period as the previous game, it gives the players more options to fight back, while also introducing an extra element of corruption. While the Rippers are sworn to stop these monsters, they have realized that they are weaker than the monsters they fight. So they've developed a secret weapon. Rippers will slay a foe, then rip a piece out of them, preserve it, and turn it into a body modification that they can use to gain some semblance of the powers wielded by their foe. This comes with consequence, however, as the influence of these dark powers can drive the Ripper insane, and may have consequences for their very soul. Story-wise, you get more agency in your capabilities, While the powers of the Cabal are great, your Rippers are powerful in their own right. You also have a fairly interesting plot point campaign, which leads to a globe-trotting adventure of hunting rumors of the Cabal. Mechanically, the game is simpler than Call of Cthulhu, but is no less lethal. The explosions of dice leads to unpredictable combats which can have devastating consequences. But the classless character building leads to great freedom in building your Rippers. Oh, and we played this on the channel, so check it out here if you're interested.
Number 3.
Okay, enough of Victorian England, let's look at a couple games which branch out a bit. First up, let's go backwards to Colonial Gothic. Colonial Gothic is a game of horror in the days of colonial America, between the founding of Roanoke in 1585 and the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. This is a pretty unique setting. There are, of course, other colonial-era games out there, but it isn't one you see explored very often. Even better, it takes that tumultuous time and adds in a secret underbelly of conspiracies, cults, and genuine monsters. The world is entering the age of reason, and belief in these old myths is waning, but the players know better. Magic is very real here, and you will need to fight it off while also helping to build this fledgling nation. The lower tech level from the earlier settings helps to impart an even more desperate feel against the creatures. The status of the Americas as fairly untapped land lends itself to the fear of the unknown. This game offers 3 styles of play, but to capture a similar feel to Ravenloft, we want the supernatural style. This is where magic runs wild, with threats of a far more epic scale coming to bear. This is not a gritty game. It is closer to the action gameplay, but that's not to say it's cartoonish. With Rippers, you can get some absurd situations when your players kit themselves out with monster bits. Here, there is a bit more grounding to the capabilities. Now, as far as mechanics, you'll find it's similar to D&D, as this is the first pure roll and add system we've looked at, but instead of a D20, you are looking at 2D12. Quite an interesting choice.
Number 4.
Now, we've gone backwards from the standards, so let's take a look forward for this next game. For this I bring Never Going Home. Set during World War I, another very underused time period, it explores a world where the immense death toll has torn the veil and allowed otherworldly forces to step into our world. The PCs are soldiers in this conflict, now not only fighting their human adversaries, but the supernatural creatures stalking the night. Some may tap into the whispers from beyond the veil and work magic to protect their unit, at the cost of corruption. This corruption may one day drive them to wander into the night and become another horror. And because corruption is hidden from the players, each use of whispers, horrific events, or antagonist powers may be what pushes the character over the limit. The result is an atmosphere of dread. If the enemy army doesn't kill you, if the others don't devour you, you may still fall to the corruption. But you, a soldier, fight on, knowing that your war has become one for the continuation of the human species. The game itself uses the very interesting +1 system, where you'll make skill rolls by rolling a number of dice equal to your rating in a skill and counting the numbers of 5s or 6s. But what makes it interesting is your attribute tied to the skill allows you to manipulate the roll by adding dice, changing numbers, re-rolling dice, or even temporarily gaining new skills. Characters are also designed to be cycled out of the party. You are a soldier. You had a life at one point, but the horrors you're fighting against have pushed all of that into the background. It is now your struggle against the forces that defines you. Character creation is kept relatively simple, and this also allows for a game where character lifespans are measured in missions, not stories.
Number 5.
Alright, you've made it to the last entry, so let's break out a weird one. So far we've looked at games which match pretty closely to the setting of Ravenloft. So now let's grab something which embodies the feeling of living in the shadow of a Dark Lord. I'm bringing out an odd gem here with My Life with Master. In this game, you're not a hero struggling against a dark power. Instead, you're one of the minions of this monster, suffering their abusive control while completing tasks they give you. Throughout the game, you'll try to build relationships with the villagers nearby, finding ways to satisfy the master without harming the people you connect with. Succeed and your love increases. Fail and you sink further into self-loathing or weariness. As this love grows, eventually one of the minions will find the strength to defy the master, which begins the end of the game. The minion who defies will be locked in a deadly struggle against the master, which will end with the master's death. Meanwhile, the other minions will have last chances to interact with the townsfolk, to build their connections, or to join the struggle with the master. On either side of the conflict, they can speed or delay the death of the master, but they cannot prevent it. And when the master finally falls, you determine what happens to your minion. The general ending is determined by your final love, self-loathing, weariness, and reason, but the actual description of how the event plays out is something for the player to decide. For example, if weariness is greater than the sum of reason and self-loathing, the minion will flee into the night, disappearing from society. But if the sum of love and reason is greater than the sum of self-loathing and weariness, the minion manages to integrate themselves into society. Working with those calculated endings, each player gets to tell the story of how that plays out for their minion. The game has a delightfully dark and emotional arc to it. It isn't a game to play if you're looking for adventure. Instead, it's a game to explore relationships, knowing it will likely end with a dark tragedy. The only downside to this game is it is a bit awkward to get a hold of. I'm still dreaming of the day when I can find a physical copy, but for now, you can pick up a PDF from the creator's website. Not quite as convenient as DriveThruRPG, where you can find the rest of the games, or itch.io, but the creator was very quick to reach out once I ordered it. There we have it, 5 games you can run that feed that Ravenloft itch. If I had to choose, I would probably run My Life with Master if I'm looking for a one-shot, or Rippers if I'm looking for a campaign. But any of these games can fill that hole, all depending on what you find interesting. Now, if you're looking for more games, why not take a look at this video of 5 mechanics used in 10 games which can make character creation more exciting. And if you enjoyed this, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know what you like or don't like, or if you have another game that you think would fit well. Anyway, thank you for watching, and remember, there's gaming outside the Forgotten Realms.